This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicoast. Today is October 10th, 2019, and this is episode 159. Politicoast is the BC Politics podcast. Tell us what you think of the show by leaving us a review or get at us on social media. Thank you to our patrons for your support. Your generosity makes this show possible. Help us build the show by throwing us a couple bucks a month at patreon.com/Politicoast and by recommending the podcast to a friend. Editing services are provided by Cortado Productions. I'm Scott Deluna-Bohm.
And I'm Maria Dobrinskaya.
Thank you for joining me again.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
On today's show, we'll be talking about the eventful first week of the new legislative session, as well as what's going to be the impact from the federal leadership debate. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC Legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN, all lowercase, for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to britishcolumbiatoday.ca. Segment 1, a busy first week.
Yeah, the legislature's back in session. It's hasn't been a dull moment, I don't think, since they started Monday.
No, the news started dropping even before that.
Well, yeah, they were getting ready for it late on Friday. Things were lining up.
Yeah, so the events of that were covered in a little addendum episode I put out over the weekend. So if you want to know all about what's happening with now former Minister Ginny Sim, you can go listen to that. But the week started off quite interestingly with a big press conference by Andrew Weaver that had been teased the week before.
A lot of speculation over the weekend. A Friday afternoon or Friday evening press release indicating he had a big announcement. So we had a lot of time to ponder what that announcement might be.
Yeah, turns out he will not be seeking re-election in the 2021 provincial election.
Or whenever the next provincial election is.
Yes, probably then, but...
Yeah, part of his announcement, I think, certainly he referred repeatedly to the next election being 2021. So given that him and his fellow Green MLAs will have a lot to say in terms of when the next election will be, I think that we're likely looking at the full term.
Yep. So in the meantime, he's asked the leadership of the party, the executive, to start the process to find a replacement leader. There'll be a leadership race with the goal of having someone in place about a year ahead of the next election. Andrew Weaver said that he figures it takes about a year to get up to speed, and so he wants someone well prepared by the time the writ drops. Yeah,
I think they'll probably look at something in the spring leadership race. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was an interesting announcement. He's on the record, has said repeatedly before that he doesn't think politics should be a career. And he was there for a very specific reason. And, I personally believe in term limits. I know that's something that he's advocated before. And part of one of the things that I think is that why term limits are a good idea is because they allow for succession planning in a way that I think a lot of people in politics, a lot of political parties recognize they should do, but is often quite hard to do in real time. So he's laid it out, and it'll be very interesting to see what that process looks like for the Green Party, because he has been really the face of the Green Party. He's been at the front in the leadership, both by getting himself elected as the first Green Party MLA, and then bringing a couple colleagues on side in 2017. So
yeah, at least big shoes to fill.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting in terms of the dynamics. We'll see what happens in the federal election as well on the island. But one of the things that he himself would admit, one of the things I think we saw play out in 2017 is this province has never elected an NDP government without some kind of split on the right. And so what we saw in 2017, I think, was a number of people who were tired of Christy Clark, who were ready to see her go, but we're not going to vote New Democrat. And so Andrew Weaver and the Green Party provided them with an opportunity of a place to go. And I think the Green Party is going to be in an interesting challenge in terms of where they go politically or ideologically. Like, so other than, and we're seeing this in the federal election as well, their tagline is, not left, not right, but forward. And
that seems to be a popular direction for
yeah,
parties
well,
to
everybody
go.
wants to go forward. Who wants to go back? Except for those people who want to make something great again. But yeah, so I think that Andrew Weaver is a centrist liberal, like in a small L way, and I think the party has benefited electorally from that. But I also think they're feeling pressure to be more progressive or to have a leader that is representative in a different way. So it'll be interesting to see how that tension plays out over the leadership race.
Do you have any prediction on who's going to jump in or what the outcome's going to be?
No, I mean, no, I don't. I'm excited actually to see, because I don't think there has been that much interest, frankly, in Green Party leadership races in BC in the way that there will be with this one. So I'm not making predictions, but I'm definitely curious and look forward to watching it.
Yeah, I think the name that's probably going to get talked about the most is Sonia Furstenau, one of the two other MLAs from the Green Party. She seems to have the, I think, biggest media profile outside of Andrew Weaver.
Yeah, she's a super solid MLA, has been a really good advocate for her community. She's House Leader as well in the legislature, so she's been a part of the Legislative Assembly's Management Committee, so the group that's been dealing with all of the fallout and issues around the Plecas situation, or it's the Plecas situation. It's a James Lenn situation, but all of that mess. So no, she's certainly well positioned too. And I think if she decides to make that leap, would be in a very strong position to be the next leader. But not everybody wants to be the leader either. So be curious to see if she throws her hat in. I don't know what their process around interim leadership is, but I assume that
I believe Weaver's announced he's going to stay
he'll
on.
He'll stay on in that
so
role.
there will be a gap until. I mean, he's going to remain an MLA until the end of the term.
He's not stepping down, and so he'll continue to play that role until somebody succeeds him. So yeah, I mean, if she would not fall into the role, she would work hard to get there, and is already deservedly in the mix. But she's already in the House as well, right? So it'll be interesting if there are any, I hate to use the word celeb, star candidates or anything like that.
Do we have a lot of star candidates in
Pamela Anderson? No, I don't know, right? I don't like the term anyways, because I think that there's a lot of different criteria and qualifications that go into making a good politician, and celebrity is rarely one of them. But it will be interesting to see in a time where I think the Green brand is really strong and climate is at the forefront of politics and people's concerns about the issues that need to be addressed. If anybody, steps forward that we might not have expected to. So yeah, we'll see. It's, in case you thought that 2020 was going to be a quieter year politically, I don't think that's going to be the case.
No, probably not. Well, let's move on. You already hinted at this a bit with the Gary Lenz situation. And this week, the LAMC, the Legislature Affairs...
Legislative Assembly
Management
Committee. Yes.
Yes, the Legislative Assembly Management Committee came out and released one of the reports we've been waiting on regarding the whole legislature expense scandal. This was the one conducted by former Transit Police Chief.
Wasn't he deputy? He was deputy VPD as well, Doug Lepard.
Yes, Doug Lepard. Yeah, so he was brought in to investigate Gary Lenz under the Police Act, and he found that Gary Lenz had lied during the investigation and comes to some rather different conclusions than the previously released McLaughlin report.
Yeah, we had a hint that something was coming because Lenz resigned a few days before this report went live, and
it had been reported that he'd seen
exactly. As part of the news around his resignation was he saw this latest investigation report and decided to resign. So this story is a series of bombs that keep erupting, mixed metaphors there, but and with different impacts, right? And so a lot of and without question, Plekis is a colorful character, as is
Let's
his.
put it mildly.
I was looking for the right adjective there. He also has, as valid as some of his concerns have proven to be, I think, a lot of his conduct through the process hasn't helped him make the case. And so, it was very interesting in looking at the differences with the Police Act investigation versus the McLaughlin report. And my understanding is that her report, very different scopes. Her report was largely looking at sort of the rules of the legislature and whether they had been followed or not. But Gary Lenz, as a sergeant at arms, was also operating under the Police Act, and so Plekis sought out this investigation after he was unsatisfied with the McLaughlin report. I admit to being confused when Lenz resigned, and I'd heard that this other report was coming out. I thought it might have been the special prosecutors or the RCMP, because there's still that going on. But this whole thing is a mess. To put it mildly, and then there's been some attempts from the opposition, from the BC Liberals, to further muddy the water, I would say, on this story, and accusations that around documents being shredded by the Premier's chief of staff. That not even accusations. There's things that were in the report. But, I feel I'm not, I don't have a lot of time for those accusations. That's what I'll say, especially in light of the refusal of BC Liberal MLA Linda Reid, who was a previous speaker. She did not communicate directly with Doug Lepard and only spoke to him through her lawyer. And so I think that the story will continue. That's what I'll say.
That it definitely will. So just to circle back a bit to the contents of the report itself, it mostly focused on the theft of the alcohol that was alleged and whether or not that was being properly investigated. Lenz apparently has said multiple things about whether or not it was being investigated, whether it was worthy of investigation. And this is really what has been the center of the report.
Yeah, that was the area that Lepard found he was being untruthful. And I guess Lepard had more investigative powers or something. It seems like there was a number of witnesses that directly contradicted Lenz's account of that particular situation. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I keep coming back to, and even with the McLaughlin report, and that's why I think it's interesting that this one is in relation to the Police Act, is there's sort of two stories I feel like happening here, maybe even three. One is, did they do anything wrong based on the legislature rules, which maybe, I think we're seeing, yes, they did, but there was a bunch of not necessarily everybody does this kind of response to some of the accusations that for me are not good enough. Even if it's acceptable to have these kinds of travel expenses or to, write things off in the various ways that were reported, I don't think the majority of British Columbians think that's okay. So we know LAMC is now doing a bunch of either revisions of rules or putting rules in place and systems in place where they never existed to begin with.
Yeah, that's one of the other things that has really come out through this, is that there wasn't the rules you would expect to be in place.
Yeah, no, a lot of just accepted conventions. And that's what I was struck by just in trying to understand better some of these reporting structures. And they were circular in many situations of the speaker signing off, there was no accountability built in. And so again, even in some of the situations where I think it's been shown that there technically was no violation, I think there's still a big leap in assuming that means that there was, that they didn't do anything they shouldn't have done. And the entitlement, I just keep coming back to, and I think there is still more of the story, obviously, to play out. There's two special prosecutors still assigned to the case. But both of these men have now retired, resigned, stepped away. very, very large salaries. The one of the things that did come out in the McLaughlin report that didn't end up happening, but that was something that alerted Plecas, frankly, to some of this behavior, was around just James trying to orchestrate an additional retirement payout for himself, and upwards of almost $1 million. So I keep thinking back to that initial press conference that Craig James and Gary Lenz did, where they were so stunned and shocked and couldn't understand what these accusations were about, and professed that they didn't do anything wrong. And I think we have enough information now to know that that's not the case.
Yeah, now that they have retired, it's not really clear how much they can be held account within the legislature directly. But like you said, there's still the special prosecutor, and no doubt we'll be hearing more about this as it goes
and
forward.
I think even if they can't be held to, I saw that there's no sort of repercussions for Lenz. I mean, again, I think if there's criminality determined, that'll be different. But the biggest thing has been opening up the legislature and the functioning of it, and ensuring that there is much better oversight and systems in place than there has been historically, because taxpayers deserve that. At the very least. So, but we'll see. I mean, it's, I feel like what we've seen in the legislature this week in question period and some of these accusations is a deliberate attempt, I think, on the part of the BC Liberals to really muddy the waters. I don't think that most British Columbians are following all of the threads of this story. And it is one of those things where I think one of the takeaways from it that bothers me is it really, a bunch of it bothers me, but it just reinforces the cynicism I think a lot of people have around how corrupt politics is, or how distrustful the feeding at the trough and things that frankly do a disservice to our democracy overall. So
well, let's get into that, because that's the other big thing that came out of this, was the revelation in this report that the Premier's office had been made aware of the allegations back in July of 2018. Plecas' office had reached out to set up an appointment. The Premier apparently didn't want to take the meeting personally, had his Chief of Staff, Jeff Meggs, do it. And then, at the meeting, the document containing the allegations was left behind. And it since further come out that several months later, the document ended up being shredded. Now, this has been something that's generated quite a lot of talk, as you've alluded to. And, well, the document getting shredded is probably not a big deal. It's getting maybe blown a little out of proportion because
it's a copy. The original is in the hands of the RCMP. Yeah.
Yeah. So the document management stuff in there, that seems to be getting blown out of proportion. But what doesn't seem necessarily entirely on the level is that several months later, when Craig James and Gary Lenz were walked out of the legislature, the Premier basically pled ignorance, said he didn't know what was going on, when it turns out his office was briefed on this several months prior, and apparently has took no action in the meantime to further accountability in the legislature before that issue was made public.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think the shredding of the document, I agree. I don't think it's a big deal. Somebody I was talking to said, was it the 90s? That was like the original exists and is in the in the hands of the authorities. I think that going back to it's critical actually. Piece of this story is to go back to the reason why the Premier did not want to take that meeting to begin with. And so I don't think it's that uncommon for, elected leader, particularly the Premier or Prime Minister, to have staff take these meetings on their behalf. But the Premier specifically said he didn't want to be part of that meeting because he'd been on the record in the legislature as voting against Craig James. And so one of the things that I also think is really a critical part of this story is that Craig James, I can't recall the year, but it was breaking several decades of convention when he was appointed as the clerk.
I believe it was 2011.
I feel like that's what I was going to say as well. So Horgan was the House Leader at the time of the opposition, and all of the Liberals voted to appoint James as the clerk, and the NDP, along with independent MLA Vicky Huntington, voted against it. And that is very highly unusual. Almost always these independent officers of the legislature are appointed unanimously. And so that, that's come up a few times. It certainly came up in Plekis's report. But I think that regardless of the rationale that the Liberals had, I could speculate, but I don't know the reason. It did not, right from the get-go of his appointment, put him in a position of not being neutral, right? And straining the relationship that he might have had with various members of the legislature. So I don't actually think there's anything, I think it's appropriate for the Premier not to have taken the meeting. There's an issue about the clerk. Maybe that's it. I don't think that 4 months later, when this happens, that he necessarily knew anything other than there was an issue. So I think that it's part of the job of staff to protect their leadership as well. And I think there's a lot of, I think we need to know more. Again, I think there's been some sloppiness on the part of how this thing has been handled overall. But for this to be brought to the Premier's office, and then for the direction from the Premier's office to be take this to the RCMP, and then for that whole process to be disclosed in the Lepard report, so for there to be full disclosure with the investigations as they're ongoing, to me is following the practice that it should have. And if there are sort of, anomalies in that process, I think it's largely due to the fact that this is an unprecedented kind of situation, that there is not a clear protocol to observe in how it rolls out. So, but I also have partisan bias. I'll just disclose that. That's not going to be a secret to anybody who's familiar with me and listening to your podcast. So, I mean, that's kind of where I sit with it. I think that the Liberals are still, again, I see that there's a bunch of questions still to be answered in this whole process. That initial appointment of James, to me, is an issue. And I think that there's also, again, the more that this can be muddied, the less it's about, the less political points can be scored on either side, right? So that's kind of how the two parties in the legislature are trying to play it out. But I'm just, I'm glad that I still continue to be appreciative of Plekis as a citizen in British Columbia of uncovering this, and whatever sort of sloppiness or messiness the process entailed. I really don't think that we would have seen any of this with a partisan speaker of either side, right? So the independence of the speaker was really critical, I think, in uncovering this. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and no doubt we'll be having a lot more questions in question period going forward about this, because there's still some unresolved issues about who knew what when, and
I think
why it got dragged out. And I do think the intervening couple months of why didn't this get actioned earlier? Why did it take from July until November if there was
I think it was brought, my understanding is that it was brought to the RCMP in August. So, and then it took them till November to be in a position to feel like those guys needed to be removed from the legislature. But I admit I have not read the 100 and something pages of the report. So yeah, more questions for sure to be answered. I mean, I also think that part of what the Liberals are trying to do with the shredding, because they were less focused on this timeline and more on the specific document, and that's trying to create a narrative along with some of the accusations that are out there around Ginny Sims, right? And what we've seen in terms of management of documents in her ministry. Right? So
there's been a through line to a lot of this stuff, and it's not entirely undeserved.
No, I think there's good questions there that need to continue to be asked. I don't think that the focus on shredding this one document is really the place for the opposition to go if they are trying to figure out what's going on. But I'm unconvinced that they actually want to figure out what's going on, because I think
it's probably a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah.
Moving on to our second segment, the federal election continues. And this week we had the two official debates. The French one, I believe, is wrapping up right around the time we're recording this. And last week I completely misspoke, thought the French debate was a week. Anyway.
Here we are. They've happened.
It's happened now. So the English one happened Monday at a nice and early 4 p.m. here.
A time that reminds British Columbians that Central Canada doesn't care about us. Yes, yes.
Yeah, the French one, they managed to schedule an hour later, which makes you wonder why they couldn't
I think
have
those,
a more
those
convenient...
Quebecers stay up a little bit later, maybe, than people in Ontario. I don't know. But
It definitely made it appear that BC was an afterthought when
Totally.
the debate commission based out of Ottawa was setting this up.
Yeah, I know. And there was nobody on that commission from anywhere outside of, Ontario, Quebec, Maritimes, I think. So, yeah, no, the timing, I was feeling quite seen by my Cascadian peeps on Twitter with all the people complaining about the various obligations they had from work and whatnot. And I think that, one of the key points there, because people are like, well, you could tape it, you could watch it later. There's certainly no shortage of opportunities to watch it later, but you're watching it with everybody else's takes in your head. You kind of already know, unless you're like, don't tell me the score of the game because I'm taping it at home. It's hard not to, hear the zingers and catch some of the crossfire.
Yeah, also, with social media these days,
Yeah.
it's very much a real-time event.
Totally.
It's just not the same.
No, so I was fully on side with the Western alienation around the debate timing. I felt it, but still, I'm plugged in enough that I managed to carve out the time. My children were annoyed by how late dinner was, but I had to watch the debate. So.
Yeah, I made the time too, but I think a lot of people out here missed out on that.
Yeah, I think there's a question of how many people actually watch the debate in general. I'd be curious.
I actually haven't seen any stats on that.
No, and I don't even know how, not back in the day, you could figure out the TV ratings, right? And now with so many channels, I'm sure there are still ways to track
but
viewers.
You have to aggregate across everyone's live stream, the TV.
But I would be curious of sort of what percentage of Canadians actually watched it in real time or relatively real time. I suspect it's a smaller number than we might want, but after watching it for a bit, I could also understand why.
It was not really not well formatted, and let's jump into that as the next thing. Is that the format was not great, and you had a very crowded stage with sitz leaders. At least two of them should not have been there.
Well, I'd say at least one for sure. I know that you didn't think Blanchette should be there.
If we were doing 10 debates or something, and you wanted to stretch out. But if you're going to have one national debate, it should generally be limited to parties that run nationally. And if 3/4 of Canadians can't vote for someone, they probably shouldn't be taking up airtime on the one debate that's going to happen.
I think the key issue there is that there shouldn't have just been the one debate.
Also
and
that.
I just disclosed how much of a West Coaster I am. I don't feel that connected to Quebec, but I disagree. The debate during the election is the one and only time where I'm exposed in that way to the Bloc leader in English. And he can only win seats in one province, but there's enough seats in that province that theoretically, and it's happened historically, he could be the opposition leader. And so I don't know if that's still true, but it was true.
93.
No, I don't know if we have more seats now. So in BC, I don't know if there is still
78 seats in
Quebec.
So, the official opposition is 100-ish. Well, right before they dissolve, so it's feasible.
But the point being that the Bloc can and has historically had a significant impact on on federal politics, and in an election where things are both very static and also very volatile, having a sense and there's some very key issues coming out of Quebec, having a better sense of who the Bloc leader is, I think is in the interest of English Canada. But I think that, I agree that there should have been more than one debate. I think the fact that Trudeau is in one English debate the entire campaign is not enough. But one of the main criticisms, frankly, I have of the debate, because I think that a lot of the time we expect we go into these things and we think that they should be debating policy and we have expectations of how it should play out, but often it becomes a muddled crosstalk and people trying to get their digs in or their clips. I thought the fact that there was no opening or closing statements was a big problem, because there was no opportunity for all of them to sort of get their key lines out there. And so we saw them trying to do that in questions that they should have been answering. The biggest example of that was Scheer right off the bat with his "you're a phony, you're a lie." He just did the full-on attack into Trudeau on a question that was supposed to be about foreign policy. And so it didn't matter what the question was. He knew that this was going to be the opening line that he delivered. And we kind of saw that, Jagmeet Singh had a bunch of those kind of moments as well.
There's a lot of rehearsed
repeating
lines
his pharma, so there was no opportunity for them to kind of get their message box out there to Canadians right away, so that they could engage a little bit more in the questions and the content. But I also think we're living in a time now of, and I think that leaders played to this before in terms of what the TV clip would be, what the news clip would be. But now with social media, they were all there. Elizabeth May, maybe not to, and Bernier not to the same extent, but the other three for sure, and certainly Scheer and Trudeau and Singh, basically delivering lines for the memes that were going to be produced by the respective parties afterwards. And maybe that's fine. That's okay. That's how they're communicating with a lot more Canadians probably than were tuned into the debate. But again, the structure, I like the idea of the debate commission in theory, but I like when they announced it, and in my opinion, it was actually supposed to do a bunch of things so we didn't end up in this situation that we're in, where I don't think there's really much on offer to Canadians who are genuinely watching, undecided who they're going to vote for and wanting to learn more about what each party has to say.
Yeah, I don't think we all allow that from the debate. And part of it, too, I think the debate commission was set up also as a way to allow the party in power to have a legitimate reason not to show up to any extra debates.
Yeah. I'm sympathetic to a certain extent about the fact that you can't say yes to every single debate, and that there is always a bit of this tension around who do you say yes to and who do you say no to, and what does that mean, and what constituencies are you brushing off as a result. I don't think that it's reasonable to expect, particularly the Prime Minister, but all the leaders to do, a dozen debates. I think it's different in the riding level. I think riding level MP candidates should be attending lots of all candidate meetings. That's a very different kind of environment, but one is not enough. And I think that we could have had some different formats. It would have been good to see a series of debates on topics.
Oh, I completely agree. I would have loved to just done 10 debates, one in each province.
Let's have a climate debate. Let's have a foreign policy debate. Let's have a Indigenous issues debate. I think that
there's a lot of stuff that we should be talking about. Just how to deal with a rising and increasingly assertive China alone should be worth 3 hours of all the leaders' time.
And it didn't even come up at all in the debate on Monday. Apparently, there was some questions tonight in French about the two Canadians that are still imprisoned there and about relationships with China. But yeah, there was a bunch of things, particularly it was striking to me how little foreign policy was brought up in the debate on Monday. And for the federal government as well, where that's they're the only level of government that is engaging on those issues, that's a big gap. But Trudeau declined the Monk debates. I'm not a defender of the Monk debates, but I think it's significant that he declined that. And there could have been, to your point, there could have been in different provinces on different subjects ways to better deliver some of these messages. 10 is too many, though. It's a lot. Just
one
from
every 4 days, basically.
Yeah, and from the perspective of somebody who has worked in partisan politics, the amount of prep and resources that go into preparing a leader for debate is a lot, and it's time that they're not out there on the campaign
Although
trail.
I actually think that might be a benefit, not a cost.
The more you do it, the more. But
the less scripted it becomes, and the more you actually those back and forth might actually reveal something interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to find the balance, is what I'm saying. Like more than what we had, but there is a point where it's also just they're kind of rehashing their standard jabs and stuff. I mean, I also say that as somebody who would watch all 10 of them, and I know that most Canadians would not, and so there is that aspect of just providing more opportunities for people to just kind of see the leaders in action and their dynamic with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also worth pointing out, I think, before we move on, that last election, the famously closed off Stephen Harper managed to show up to 4 debates.
Yeah. No, he did more than Trudeau. He also, I mean, one of the things we saw at the beginning of the campaign, because there was the Maclean's debate that happened very early, that Scheer and May and Singh were in, and Trudeau, there was an empty podium there. But up until the blackface revelations emerged, Trudeau also had a series of days in a row where he wasn't having media availabilities with the press that were flying with him on his campaign plane and who had paid to be there. So there was already, some of that was, and there was a lot of references to Stephen Harper, who limited the questions to, I want to say 3 or 5, but at least made himself available for a limited number of questions every day. Now, there was a point in the campaign where that was obviously not a feasible strategy moving forward for Trudeau to maintain. But no, I mean, I think that there's a sort of incumbency thing for sure around less is more. And given what we've seen from the Liberal campaign and how they came out really attacking the Conservatives and sort of keeping Trudeau out of the, out of being grilled in any way, they want to keep him out of the less he talks, the fewer mistakes he'll make, and the more they can just try and get through the last, the remaining.
Yeah, and incumbents always are the ones to take the most heat. So
yeah, because they're running on their record, for sure. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about the structure around the debate, but we didn't really touch too much on the debate itself. What were your thoughts about it?
I mean, again, I'm disclosing my bias, but I think that it was widely a takeaway beyond just people who were already declared to vote NDP was that Jagmeet took it, and he was, a lot of the comments were just how relaxed he was, how quick he was with some of the jokes, that he seemed human, which, in politics these days, the fact that is something that you say as a positive about politicians and as something as a distinguishing factor, I think is
it's quite noticeable though. And those were his stronger moments when he was reacting kind of as a more normal person rather than
totally
going back to the rather hackneyed I met a person
for sure and some of his more standard message box lines. But I mean, one of the things that is really remarkable, and you could see this with Elizabeth May, like you could tell she's done a lot of debate. She's very comfortable in a debate format. She knows the issues quite well, but she's also comfortable in just engaging. And for Jagmeet, it's remarkable to have such a good showing as such a new leader and having never done a national debate of that scope before. So that was significant. And, I think we're going to talk about what if any kind of bump he's received as a result of that. But I think that was the takeaway. I mean, I don't know that I think both Scheer and Trudeau kind of did what they needed to do, but in the way that we've been seeing throughout this campaign, neither of them are really doing enough to break away from the other or to kind of have impact. And so Scheer delivered the lines, the attack lines that he needed to around Trudeau. Trudeau mostly managed to kind of stay out of the way for a large part of the first.
You could even forget he was on the stage for
Well,
a few
yeah, there
points.
was a whole first segment where I was laughing. I saw somebody tweet, like, good to see everybody holding Prime Minister Maxime Bernier to task, like it was a lot of...
Yeah, and a lot of that was because of
the structure.
The first question, second, I think it might have been, around either the first or second, I can't quite recall, are around Bill 21.
Yeah, and I think even the first question was to him, which I found curious, but I read about afterwards was apparently random.
Yeah, and same thing with directing the
with
Bill
the
21
to Jagmeet.
yeah.
So, I mean, I think that Trudeau, we saw a little bit finally at the end on the climate discussion, we saw a little bit of energy there where he started to get more passionate about the messages he was delivering. But I mean, I think personally that was the right strategy for him. Like, just, if nobody's talking to him, then nobody's attacking him. And again, as the incumbent, that's the place he wants to be. Elizabeth May, as I said, I think is very good in these situations, very comfortable and knows the material very well, but it was not a policy debate. And that's what she does well in. And so she did have a couple of moments. She was very clear in telling Scheer that he wasn't going to be prime minister, which I thought was a curious statement. I personally really enjoyed her kind of mom admonishment of Trudeau, of how disappointed she was in his failure to live up to his climate promises. That I thought was a good line, but it wasn't, again, she also didn't have a breakthrough. And then, I mean, to your earlier point, Blanchette and Bernier, they had nothing to lose and not much to contribute either. I thought Blanchette had a few good moments.
A bit of snark, which...
Yeah,
that's one of the things the bloc leader's there for.
Exactly. But again, I as a West Coast Canadian, like I find the bloc's platform very confusing. Like I really agree with some of it, and I really disagree with a lot of it. So yeah, I mean, I thought that Jagmeet was the only one who broke through, and again, he's had fairly low expectations going in, although it wasn't the first time he performed well. He performed well in the Maclean's debate as well, and I think has shown himself to be a good campaigner. But, does any of that matter, I guess, is the next question.
Yeah. So we'll get to that in a moment. I think just my final thoughts on it is that, Scheer, I mean, he got in the jabs he wanted to get in, but the problem with his whole campaign so far is he is way too focused on what Trudeau does wrong, and he's been unable to make the case of why he should replace Trudeau, and the debate did not help that at all.
Yeah. Well, and there's not we'll see again what happens on the 21st, but Canadians are fairly forgiving and patient people in general, and it took a decade for people to really be done with Harper. And I don't doubt that there is the conservative vote is solid. It's the most solid, but there's not a lot of room to grow. And outside of it, he's anger,
not even trying to grow it either, which is the other thing.
This is, I think, the key point.
Yeah. There's going to be a 32 to 34% that will just show up, whatever, regardless. But Scheer's done very little to try and get that next 5% that's needed for a majority.
No, and I think a lot of what we're seeing with his, just attacking Trudeau is more about mobilizing his people, right?
Yeah,
and voter motivation, because there's a lot of people are just so turned off by this whole election that, I mean, voter turnout always matters, but we're seeing that. I mean, I also think there's a similar thing happening with Trudeau and how much he invokes Doug Ford in particular. I mean, Harper to a certain extent as well, but that's also about motivating his voters, right? Or people who are in the universe of possibly voting Liberal, and making sure that they do instead of just staying home on the 21st. But yeah, what is Scheer running on in this campaign? Like, I don't know.
I don't think Scheer's ever really done a campaign aimed at growing his base. When he ran for leader, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
Entirely focused on just drumming up support among the base.
Yeah.
And he just seems incapable of looking beyond that.
Yeah, and he's not.
And
I think
it's the thing where I think he's acting like he wants to be official opposition leader the way he's running. Like he's still in that mold, and like it's if you run to be official opposition leader, you're probably going to end up as official opposition leader, and
or not even, because as we saw today, there was already speculation. There was a piece in the Globe and Mail today about will Peter MacKay be the next Conservative leader? And I was like, wow. 801 Club is starting already, right? And then, they walked it back and a bunch of that. But the fact that there are senior level conservatives speculating out loud, even in error, about who comes next at a time where Trudeau is very damaged. Like an effective Conservative leader should not be in a position of maybe being able to pull together a minority government, right? And that's what we're seeing, I think, happen. He's underwhelming.
Yeah, and I think I more or less agree on your take on Trudeau, how he handled in the debate. So let's move on to kind of what's the impact of this. The press coverage following this largely declared Singh the winner. We've seen his favorability go up a fair bit. The polling numbers in terms of vote intention have not climbed nearly as much. Right now, it's kind of looking at like between maybe a 2 to 4% boost, which, it's good. It's the movement in the right direction for him. But at the same time, I think the highest number I've seen is 18%, and that's still lower than their vote share in 2015.
Yeah, no, there was definitely, I think there was a few polls out today. There was speculation and some rolling polls right in the wake of the debate, but nothing that was solid enough to determine the capture or the bump from the debate. He's the only leader that right now has favorability ratings going in a positive direction. But yeah, the party, and there's often a gap between leader favorability and party support. But this is the first bump we've seen, really.
It's the first movement of the polls, really, at any
at
point.
All, yeah.
The blackface stuff didn't even move the
totally.
polls.
There's a whole bunch of it that's just really depressing. But there needed to be some kind of movement, and I think that the timing is right as well. That's what I'll say. The momentum is in his favor, and we're also 11 days out. Maybe it's 10.
Well, it's the 21st. It would be 11 days.
Yeah. So it's we've seen in the last two elections, we've seen, and I'm not predicting this is going to happen, but we've seen significant movement from the third party in both of those situations, overtaking the second party. In 2011, it was the Orange Wave under Jack Layton, and then in 2015, it was Trudeau coming from behind and overtaking Mulcair. And so, despite people like us paying close attention to this stuff, this is the weekend that people start to tune in, right? The advance polls open on Friday. It's the discussions over over Thanksgiving dinner. And so, and there's still enough time to capture that. Does this translate for the NDP in any real way? I don't know. I wouldn't,
It's a little early to say, and I don't think we're going to get another orange wave.
No. I don't think there's any wave coming. Partly what I would say, which is going to be a real.
Yeah, people aren't enthusiastic about the leading parties, but at the same time, there's not the critical weakness that was the Nadia of Liberals to.
Totally, and I'm also pretty out there publicly in my support for electoral reform, and I think we are starting to. Even before we saw some poll numbers, I could tell that internal polling from the Liberals showed some kind of rise from the NDP because they started to do their strategic voting fear mongering, which is expected, but it's even harder to swallow in this election based on how many times we were told by Justin Trudeau that 2015 would be the last election under first past the post. But that's the other thing we've seen.
Well, that's the thing is this. Him going back on that may be the thing that ends up saving his government because.
Yes or no, or, he's willing, basically reneging on that is the Liberals saying we would rather give the Conservatives power sometimes, then sharing power with the NDP or the Greens or the Bloc or whoever for the majority of time. Or, most Canadians fall into a sort of center progressive kind of sphere. But one of the things that I think with some of the polling that we've seen, the Angus Reid polling that came out today, it shows a significant bump in favorability for Singh, which frankly is also a lot of Conservatives. Like a lot of people saying, I like him. It doesn't mean they're going to vote for him, right? And of course, Conservatives are loving Jagmeet Singh right now based on this first past the post system that we have. And, Harper didn't get a majority until the NDP formed official opposition, right? There is a direct correlation there that the Liberals definitely play into in trying to scare people to continue to vote for them. But the voter, I don't know, I don't remember the exact language that pollsters use, but how solid the vote is, there's big discrepancies. So like the Conservative vote is super solid. I think 70% of voters who say they're going to vote Conservative are very certain that they're going to vote Conservative. But after that, the Liberals, I think, is about 50%. But when you get into NDP and then Greens and, it's all like, I'm certain, I'm pretty sure, but there's a lot more things moving around, right? And I think that's where, again, strategic voting comes into play, and people know what they want to do, but they're not sure if that's what they should do. And, I think what happens in the next week will help clear up some of that. But I mean, a lot of those questions are just not, there's no way to answer them with accurate enough data until, the 21st. Like we can't determine a minority government. I do think it's going to be, just bringing it to BC, it's going to be really interesting. Like one of the things that this aggregate polling or this national polling doesn't really tell us is what's going on regionally, right? And so that's the other thing with both the Conservatives and the Liberals. The Liberals have a way more efficient vote. They may, the Conservative vote is quite concentrated in the prairies, Alberta, and BC to a large extent. With the Bloc doing as well as they look to be doing in Quebec, that will mostly eat at the Liberal vote, but it will eat at the Conservative vote to a large extent as well. And then, what does the Ford factor mean for Ontario? So in BC, we've got outside of the Lower Mainland and the island where, the island, we have some interesting races between the NDP and the Greens, and we'll see what happens there. And there's not really much that can move, I don't think, in Vancouver proper, but there's a lot sort of outside of the suburb, outside of Vancouver that could shift and certainly could shift, a number of 3 or even 4-way races. But I'm always reminded that a lot of rural BC, a lot of these races are between Conservative and NDP. And the Liberals won more seats in 2015, I think, than they had in a really long time. I don't remember, but decades. And again, without a red wave, without any party really being able to carry a bunch of seats just based on the performance of the party nationally and the leader, there's going to be a lot of riding level battles that will be interesting. And BC, we might actually, I know everybody says this every time and we all really want it to be true, we might actually matter on election night. People might have to stay up and see what happens in BC. I know in 2015 it was done before the polls even closed here.
Yeah, we're not going to get a red wave in the Maritime, Atlantic Canada again. No,
and it might be that we already know who the government is, but whether or not they have a minority or majority is determined in BC. So that's where, I'm curious to see, I'd be curious to see more riding level breakdowns.
Yeah, that's the thing that's unfortunately, it's hard to do. When you have 100,000 people, it's hard to
You can't have accurate polling anyways. And then it's also, it's even when you do the regional, so, again, polling is interesting. And I think we are able to see these kind of trends overall. But what that means in various regions of the country, I don't think we have an accurate sense of, other than it's a very volatile electorate, and things could really change or they could really not change. But I'm hopeful we have a minority government. That's what I'll say. I don't think either Scheer or Trudeau deserve a majority, but
I agree with that.
We'll see. I still think it's possible Trudeau wins another majority government.
It's not out of the question. believe that's, depending on exactly what the latest polls are, the poll tracker that tries to project. Ryan's usually has a Liberal majority as its second or third most likely outcome. And right now, they have, a 32% of a majority and a 33% of a minority for the Liberals. So kind of the 2/3 of the likely outcomes are the Liberals hold power in some form, but it really is up in the air.
Well, again, I think it's still 11 long days. And as we've already seen in this campaign, I mean, you and I were talking before we started the podcast, like 2015 was 70-something days. This one isn't, but it feels like it is. So a lot could still happen between now and an election day. But it's increasingly, unless something breaks for the Conservatives, it is... There's very few paths to victory for them, I think, and again, we'll see.
Another Conservative leader might have other paths to victory, but I don't think this one does.
It's hard to see how that plays out, but the voters will determine it.
Yeah, well, let's move on to what the parties are saying this week to try and woo over voters. Besides the debate. So there's a slew of announcements. Some parties dropping more than others. The Liberals have already released their platform, so there's not a lot of new stuff coming out. And next week's going to be the final podcast before the election, and we're going to be doing a party breakdown.
A platform breakdown. Yeah. Hopefully the Conservatives have a platform out by then.
They've said they're releasing it on Friday. So by the time people are hearing this, it may even be out.
Okay.
But,
because that's the one big thing missing is there hasn't been any kind of platform document released yet from the Conservatives.
What they have done is put out a few different announcements, such as free admission to national museums, which is about as underwhelming as...
I mean, this is what we're getting in this election. I mean, hey, sure, great, do it. I would say, what's the funding mechanisms for those museums when you're taking away the admission? Like, I didn't notice.
It's about $22 million of revenue that you're going to have to make up.
And is the government investing in these institutions to ensure that the lack of admission is not just, depriving them of being able to continue to maintain that level of institution. So, but again, it's
underwhelming. And out here in BC, it doesn't really do much for it. So there's 9 museums that fall under this. The closest one is about 1,800 kilometers away in Winnipeg.
Yeah, I was going to say Manitoba. And the rest are probably all like Ontario
it's like
and
Pier
Quebec.
21 and throughout Ontario.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can save the $18 on admission. You just have to take a $400 flight.
Fly there. Yeah, well, I mean, this is, again, like just these little bits and pieces of these kinds of announcements that don't, there's no theme or vision or, So, but hey, free admission to national museums. Vote getter.
Might pick up a whole dozen votes from
that one. I don't know. It checks the arts and culture box, I guess, in the platform.
I guess so. They also announced they want to fund Toronto subway expansion, which seems like a good idea. I'm just a little surprised because they're not going to win any votes downtown Toronto.
Well, and I don't know enough about, other than knowing that Toronto transit is a disaster. One of the things I was at a conference there a year ago, and I was struck by, there's both housing and transit were the topics, and similar issues for transit and housing is here in BC. But people in Toronto have a visceral response to discussions about transit and the way people here talk about housing. There was a sort of the emotions and frustrations were. So I don't know, and I know Ford has intervened in a bunch of ways and projects that should be like this and are instead like that. So I don't know enough about the internal. I'm not sure who he's courting there, but I suspect there's some loaded backstory as well, just based on the urgent need of transit in Toronto. And
the GTA transportation thing's a nightmare.
It's a mess. Yeah,
never even lived there, but having spent one day trying to get through the 401.
Yeah,
it's enough.
No, it's So there's an appeal there in some way to say, hey, we'll do more of this, but it is a bit curious. Yeah.
The other big announcement was he wants to renegotiate the Safe Third Party Country Agreement. That's the rule that allows Canadian border agents to not accept refugees if they first, or asylum seekers, if they first travel through a safe third country.
Yeah, and I mean, the NDP wants to abolish, I mean, maybe abolish isn't the right word, but remove the safe third country agreement. I think the Greens do as well, based on the argument that it's questionable if the U.S. still qualifies as a safe third country. This was, I thought, a very significant or revealing announcement from Scheer. There was a lot loaded in. There was a lot of dog whistles, and there's a lot loaded in there around, immigrants and refugees and migrants in the lead up to the Quebec debate at a crossing in Quebec that a lot of people have been crossing over. But just the language that he used was frankly reminiscent of Trump, and language around, we heard this even in the earlier debate in Maclean's, but like jumping the queue and referring to people as illegal and using language, frankly, that is not incorrect, even in terms of how Canada accepts migrants and refugees. So that was, I think, one of the key sort of anti-immigration announcements that we've seen from Scheer, and it's a bit of a nod to the Bernier folks on the right of like, look, we're going to stand up to more immigrants coming into Canada as well.
Yeah, in this specific case, the change they want to make to the Safe Third Country Agreement is to apply it not just at official border crossings.
Yeah, the entire border, which is there's no way to do that. Like it would basically mean the entire border needs to be monitored.
Which logistically is
a
not going to
big
happen,
country.
even with the 250 more people he wants to hire for.
No, this is not. And for that to be your focus and to, commit that kind of resources to something that is ridiculous and impossible, frankly, highlights what a dog whistle the announcement is, in my opinion. But we haven't seen, and maybe it's because of the presence of Bernier. I mean, there was a bunch of that in the 2015 election. That was when the Conservatives had their snitch line for, it's like un-Canadian.
Barbaric cultural practices,
right? So we haven't. I mean, we've seen some other really awful stuff, but again, largely it's been from the PPC, and we haven't quite seen that blatant of those kinds of announcements from Scheer up until this one.
And during the debate, he actually had a pretty good response to Bernier on it too.
Yeah, so
which makes the pivot battle a weird thing.
Totally. I was a bit surprised. I mean, I wasn't surprised by it based on, who he is, who's running his campaign. I mean, Hamish Marshall is the campaign director, is the one of the co-founders of Rebel Media. I'm only surprised it hasn't sort of come up sooner in that, overt kind of way. It didn't really, I mean, having said that, we're also maybe so desensitized to like rising white nationalism and this kind of language that it also didn't get a lot of coverage. I mean, it got coverage in the sense of it was an announcement on the campaign, but there wasn't a big outcry of like, oh my God, Scheer's using this language of Trump, and other than in sort of, predictable lefty circles that I travel in.
Yeah, I didn't watch the announcement itself, so I can't really weigh in on whether the language was,
and maybe there was kind of that coverage. I mean, there was just a couple of those. I mean, Scheer also said this in the debate. I think there's a lot in even sort of mainstream discussion reference to people being illegal, right? Which is incorrect. You can't be an illegal refugee. You have a right to seek asylum, and so even in it's an othering. There's these sort of ways in which they sort of dehumanize people seeking asylum here. And so there was a few examples of that, but again, not much like, and I'm not following it. I'm sure it was covered in that way, but it didn't elicit an outcry around, look at this anti-immigrant
most of the coverage
stance.
I saw was just people pointing out it wouldn't work.
Yeah, it was criticism of you can't monitor the entire border of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like building a wall.
Moving on to the Liberals, The only announcement I saw from them this week, although they may have put out a couple more, is they want to help northern communities transition away from diesel to renewable power. Seems fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, good
sure.
policy.
I mean, I
a
think
lot
that
of the
was
northern communities have diesel generators as their main.
yeah, and that was a campaign stop that Trudeau did up in Nunavut. You know, I think the announcement was, again, it's a fine announcement. I think it was more about him being the first leader to go up north and to try and secure that seat. It was a conservative seat for a couple terms, and then it was a Liberal seat in this last term, but the Liberal resigned. He didn't resign as an MP. Maybe he did, Hunter Tutu, but he had a bunch of scandals erupt as well as issues around addiction. And so he stepped away from the Liberal caucus. So there's a new candidate there. And that announcement seemed to me largely to be a hook to have Trudeau be up north and campaign with her.
For the NDP, announcement to spend $1.8 billion providing clean drinking water to Indigenous communities. CNOS had a really great response when asked if that was a blank check, which was a dumb question anyway. But.
Yeah, I mean, he's found a few moments, usually in fairly shitty situations. Sorry, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's found a few of these moments in his responding to things coming at him on the campaign trail, and this was one of them. It wasn't, and there was a bunch of discussion afterwards around should he not have been asked about the money or the spending, but as you say, it was how the question was phrased. Is this a blank check for all Indigenous communities? And he just responded point blank and said, would you ask me that if the drinking, there was no, the water was poisoned in Montreal or in Toronto or in Vancouver? He's like, no, you wouldn't. So that was and that was significant as well, because that announcement was in Grassy Narrows, where it's a community that their water source has been poisoned by mercury for 3 decades now. And why it's sort of relevant. I mean, it's relevant because there's people living there that are sick and don't have access to clean water. But it was also the topic of a moment that Trudeau had a few months ago at a fundraiser in Toronto, I believe, a $1,200 a seat fundraiser that protesters had bought tickets for to get them in the door, and then confronted him with a challenge of why he isn't addressing the situation at Grassy Narrows. And he
had a very toned down.
He had a very dismissive, kind of mocking, thank you for your donation, and the audience all laughed. And it was sort of, I would say, on the heels of the SNC Lavalin, and then now with the blackface, it was one of these moments where there's sort of the Trudeau on message and a very good performer, very good speaker, versus what's he like behind closed doors. So Grassy Narrows was already a politically heightened situation. The chief there, the local chief there, is running as a candidate for the NDP in that riding. So it was already a heightened situation. And then, yes, the exchange with the reporter and the pointedness in which Singh was able to respond. The video went viral, and they got more coverage of their announcement than they would have, otherwise in a sort of standard campaign stop. So that was a significant announcement, and also coming on the heels of the Human Rights Tribunal ruling around Indigenous kids being discriminated against on reserve, and the decision by Trudeau to appeal that ruling, or to continue to appeal those orders. So it was a moment for Jagmeet Singh to carve out space on Indigenous issues, which is, again, one of the areas that Trudeau came in 2015 with a lot of optimism, and people were very enthusiastic. They had a really excellent platform, And, again, with the firing of Jody Wilson-Raybould and then subsequent actions, I think there's been a lot of that trust has been eroded, and people don't really see him as the champion of reconciliation.
It hasn't gone as smoothly as they wanted.
No,
but,
no.
In their defense, they have put a fair bit of effort into it, and it hasn't necessarily
Totally
moved the needle forward too much.
Well, I think that
that's been a challenge. They did split the ministry
the
that
two
was handling into
ministries.
two, put more resources into that, and slowly been building out some water facilities.
And I think that they have been doing it. And the same thing with climate. I mean, I think certainly they say this on climate, but I think they might say this around their Indigenous policy as well. It's like they have the strongest record of any government in Canada historically. And that may be true, but both of those things are, the bar is so low that it would be hard to do worse, right? And I think, again, there's a gap between the expectations and the commitments going in versus what was delivered. And then just some of these symbolic things largely around both Jody Wilson-Raybould, but also Jane Philpott, who I think did really well in that ministry and was respected. And so the removal of both of those women was another symbolic thing, regardless of how much progress they had made. Those two women were seen as having driven a lot of that progress, and so how much Trudeau and his existing team can still stake out that space. I mean, I guess we'll see.
Yep. And then quickly wrap up with the Greens. They made an announcement that they want to implement UNDRIP, which I believe's already been Green policy forever, as well as allow communities to opt out of the Indian Act.
Yeah, that's a big announcement, right? That would be significant. I don't know. I've seen different responses from Indigenous folks themselves around, I don't want to say feasibility, but like just there's some gaps in terms of what does that look like. But I think that it's ambitious and it's the right sort of framework. But I don't know enough, I'm going to just say, about how you do that. And I mean, I think we see this with the Greens a lot. I mean, the NDP too, to a certain extent, like the big dreams of what we can do, and in a situation where it would be likely quite a bit more challenging in governing. To your point around what the Liberals have delivered, but I think it really is important for these other parties to stake out that space as well, because it does help to push these issues forward for whoever does end up being in government. And it's also, frankly, quite relevant here in BC. And we know that this is a big battleground for the Greens, but there is, that's legislation that will be coming up, I believe, this fall in this session. So I think it's not the Indian Act specifically, but UNDRIP, because the Indian Act is federal. So I think that's also, them signifying their commitment. And they were also criticized around their lack of representation, frankly, amongst their candidates. And so I think that in the wake of that, a lot of that criticism, they've been deliberate in trying to not just have things in their platform, but ensure that they're making announcements about that. Because that's the other thing is like they've got a big platform. A lot of these parties do. But what you're choosing to announce, to do media campaign stops and announce is also, I think, interesting in terms of what you want to ensure is on people's radar in terms of your positions.
It also is interesting that they led off in their platform with Indigenous issues, not climate.
Yeah.
As well, they announced they want to support Quebec if it wants to veto any pipeline projects. Talked a bit about that, I think, when the NDP made their same version of that announcement. It's not great from how you want a federal system to
federalism,
run.
Yeah. I talked about this just in relation to the NDP. I think that, I don't know that you can do that just specifically to Quebec, but I think really it just reflects what's happening anyways. I mean, Energy East and Northern Gateway both didn't get through largely because the people didn't want them. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of obstacles to that. So, vetoing outright versus building consensus, I think that there is the way it is right now is also not working. I mean, they have to buy the pipeline in order for that to continue to be a viable project. And I think it's still a question of whether or not it is.
Well, yeah, I think the one thing both the left and the right can agree on is they don't like the current system.
Yes, exactly.
Just
so
the reason why is a little different.
Exactly. And so, yeah, it's one thing to say like, oh, we can't grant a veto to these provinces, but we already do. We just don't say that. The federal government can override things to a certain extent, but they also can't because it's politics and they have to have these relationships. So I don't know, I think that having conversations earlier in the process and recognizing that there does ultimately need to be a partnership at both the provincial and federal level, as well as at the level of First Nations and municipalities in order for projects to go through, and how much the federal government is willing to override that. They can say they could take a strong stance, but
question, yeah.
Exactly. If it takes bringing in the army, are you sure you can do that? But is it worth it, I guess, is the question. So, I mean, that was clearly an announcement in the lead up to the debate, the Quebec debate tonight as well. And I think that there's a lot of anti-pipeline sentiment in Quebec. It's stronger there even than in BC. So that was a popular one there, I'm sure.
And finally, moving into Single Quit Take this week, follow-up to what was discussed on the pod last week around Ontario deciding to offload their film classification to BC. So as discussed back then, Ontario kind of decided to do this unilaterally before actually having an agreement in place with BC to rate the films and cover the costs and everything with it. This week, they announced they had struck a deal. So for an additional $220, Ontario distributors can get their film to use the BC rating. Or if they want to just do an Ontario-only one, they'll pay $2.08 per minute.
I have nothing to say on this.
I'm mostly throwing this in as a follow-up because it's just one of those weird Doug Ford going off half-cocked on something.
Totally. It sounds like sloppy Doug Ford governing or lack thereof, really. Like, oh, we'll just figure it out. Let BC do it,
Yeah, I have no idea if it makes sense for Ontario to do it or not, but yeah, just the way it was handled.
There's clearly a process issue happening, for sure.
Which seems to be a running theme with a lot of Doug Ford stuff is, even if the policies are good, and you can certainly debate that, there's been very poor implementation across the board.
Yep.
Well, before we close off tonight, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm part of a duo that has a podcast called Call the Question, and you can find us on pretty much every social media platform, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Call the Q, and we're also on all of the places where you can download your podcasts. And we have a different focus. We also talk about BC politics, but we're primarily focused on talking to women and ensuring that we're creating more space for women in politics in BC and hearing from expertise of women. So do come and find us and have a listen. And thanks for having me here today. I get to talk more politics here with you than I do on Call the Question. We leave most of the space there for our guests, but can't help but offer my opinion on all things politics. So thanks for having me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for joining. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. If you're a first-time listener, make sure to subscribe and let us know what you think. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/Politicoast. Any further ideas for the show, feel free to send them to us. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Sergei Plotnikov. Thanks for listening.